Chapter 6. The Masquerade Cracks. Years passed, and Kaitlyn Thorne fit the role of Prince as if Tucson had been waiting for her all along. Power whispered her name before she entered a room. No one questioned her commands openly. No one debated her laws unless they wanted their loyalty measured, recorded, and remembered. Under Kaitlyn, the Camarilla did not simply survive. It became elegant, cold, obedient, a city wrapped in velvet and surveillance. But not everyone bowed beautifully. Peter Plagojevich, another Ventru who had once reached for the throne, remained close enough to be useful and bitter enough to be irritating. He had lost the crown, but not the ambition. Since he could not rule Tucson, he made it his private pleasure to question Kaitlyn whenever he could. Not to stop her, not truly. Only to remind her that Prince did not mean sovereign. And because, somewhere beneath his polished manners and old blood arrogance, Peter enjoyed watching her eyes harden when he pushed too far. Kaitlyn tolerated him. For now. That was one of her gifts. She knew the difference between an enemy and a man who still believed himself relevant. Fae Pierce adapted to Camarilla life, or something close to it. She learned the rules, learned the silences, learned when to kneel, when to smile, when to disappear before someone decided she was too dangerous to keep. She accepted the court because she had no other shape to occupy. She accepted Kaitlyn because the bond and the seal inside her mind left very little space for truth. Did she love Kaitlyn? Was she forced to love her? After enough nights, Fae stopped trying to separate the two. Love, command, hunger, punishment, desire, all of it had been tangled inside her for too long. Delilah had made obedience feel like devotion. Kaitlyn had made possession feel like law. So Fae adapted. That was what survivors did. But resentment grew where love could not breathe. Delilah had not come for her. Not after months, not after years. No rescue, no claim. No hand reaching through shadow to pull her back. And every night Delilah stayed away, Kaitlyn's words became harder to reject. You were a sacrifice, a pawn, something thrown into fire to see what burned. Fae hated how much she wanted that to be a lie. She hated even more that it looked like truth. Aila Nazari remained efficient, terrifyingly so. As sheriff, she became the blade Kaitlyn pointed at anything that threatened her order. Sabbat disappeared. Loose tongues went quiet. Masquerade risks were corrected before most kindred knew they had existed. But Aila was changing too. Not because Kaitlyn hunted her. That was the strange part. Kaitlyn Thorne used intimacy like a weapon. With most people, she reached for closeness because closeness gave her leverage. Desire made people careless. Touch made them honest. Hunger made them obedient. Kaitlyn understood that better than most rulers, and she used it without apology. But with Aila, she had not pushed. Not truly. Aila was difficult to read. Too old, too disciplined, too silent behind the veil of her own restraint. Kaitlyn could command rooms, bend lesser wills, and make ambitious kindred reveal themselves with a glance. But Aila was different. Aila was an elder, an assassin, a creature that had survived empires, wars, lovers, gods, and grief. And somewhere beneath Kaitlyn's composure, that uncertainty frightened her. So Kaitlyn kept distance where she usually closed it. But for Aila, one moment had been enough. One intimacy. One fracture in the silence. One night where control and grief blurred too closely for either of them to name cleanly. Aila did not understand it as strategy. Or perhaps she did and chose not to. In her mind, Kaitlyn had become the reason she did not fall completely. The reason Leto's death did not finish stripping away what remained of her humanity. The reason her violence had been given structure instead of becoming endless hunger. Aila was grateful, and gratitude, inside something as old and wounded as Aila Nazari, could become devotion before anyone noticed the change. Kaitlyn had not meant to become salvation, but Aila began to see her that way, and that made the bond between them more dangerous than seduction, because Kaitlyn controlled people through intimacy. Aila needed intimacy to believe she was still capable of control. Fae admired Aila, not like she admired Kaitlyn, not like she had once desired Delilah. Aila was different. Aila was silence given form, violence under control, a monster who did not need to explain herself to make the room remember fear. So Kaitlyn gave Fae to Aila for training. Properly. Discipline, combat, control, silence. The things Fae lacked and Aila embodied like religion. Fae thought that meant something. She thought perhaps Aila could become a friend. The reality was simpler. Fae talked. Aila listened. Fae talked more. Aila remained silent, and because silence feels like permission to the lonely, Fae began to fill it with herself. She learned how to enter Aila's private haven, learned the hidden corners, the rooms where old weapons rested, the places where dust gathered over things no one else was allowed to touch. Fae marked the space in her mind as safe, a place she could return to, a place where Aila might listen again. One night, Aila was not there. Fae entered anyway, and found the diaries. Of course she read them. Fae had never been good at respecting closed doors, not when the truth might be behind them. Page by page, she consumed Aila's past in secret. Wars, blood, leto, grief, hunger, restraint, names written like wounds that had never healed. When she finished, Fae felt something dangerous. Intimacy. Not earned, stolen, but real enough to poison her perception. After that, Fae believed she knew Aila more than anyone. Aila, of course, remained untouched by that belief, still silent, still distant, still listening when Fae came near. And Fae mistook listening for closeness. That mistake would matter later. The first warning came from Shadow. One night, a portal opened inside the space Fae considered her own. Darkness folded wrong, the air split without sound, and Delilah stepped through. Not the Bishop Fae remembered, not fully. Still beautiful in that ruined, terrifying way, ancient monsters remain beautiful even when defeat has touched them. Still dangerous, still wrapped in the kind of darkness that made walls feel too thin. But weaker, not broken. Never that. Wounded by time, war, and consequences. For months, Delilah had chased Fae's shadows through forests and abandoned places, following traces of the girl she had once treated like a tool and now needed more than pride allowed her to admit. Fae did not welcome her. She stared at Delilah with something colder than anger. Disappointment. That hurt more. Delilah tried the first familiar door. Control. Her voice lowered, intimate and commanding, wrapping itself around the room like smoke. She reached for Fae's mind with the confidence of someone who still remembered every place she had once touched and every way Fae had once yielded. Fae went still. Her eyes softened. Her posture changed. For one brief, perfect moment, she looked exactly like the girl Delilah remembered. Obedient, receptive, waiting. Delilah stepped closer, and Fae let her. She let Delilah take the space between them. Let the old intensity return. Let the command settle around her body like a familiar chain. Let herself become, for a moment, the thing Delilah expected her to be. Not because the dominate held, because Fae wanted to see if Delilah would believe it did. The closeness became charged, cruel, almost nostalgic. Delilah moved with the old certainty, the old possession, the old hunger that had once taught Fae to confuse fear with devotion. And Fae did not resist. She let the memory happen. Let Delilah believe she could still reach that place. Let the old rhythm pull them both back toward what they had been, before Kaitlyn, before the seal. Then the calm came. Fae's breath broke softly from the intensity of it, and for one fragile second she looked almost lost. Then she smiled. Not sweetly, not kindly, cruelly. You did not need to use dominate for this. Delilah paused. Fae tilted her head, amusement sliding across her face like a blade. You thought you still needed to do that. A beat. I did not need to be dominated for that. The words cut deeper than Fae expected, because they revealed something Delilah had not fully known. Even with Kaitlyn's seal inside her mind, something of Delilah still remained intact in Fae. Not obedience, not ownership. Something worse. A wound that still responded when touched correctly. Delilah's gaze sharpened. For the first time, she truly pushed. Not lazily, not from habit, with focus, with force, with the full intention she had not used at first because she had believed Fae would still open for her as easily as before. And there, beneath the resentment, beneath the hunger, beneath the old conditioning Delilah had carved into her, she found it. The seal. Kaitlyn's seal. Deep. Elegant. Absolute. A Ventrue command structure hidden inside Fae's psyche like a lock placed behind the soul. Delilah touched it. Only enough to confirm. Only enough to test the shape of it. She did not push too far. This was not an attempt to free Fae. Not yet. It was a tease, a confirmation, a discovery. Kaitlyn had not merely claimed the girl, she had written herself into her. Fae noticed. Of course she noticed. Her smile faded, and beneath the cruelty came the wound. You left me there. Delilah said nothing. You did not come for me. Still nothing. You did not even try. Fae's voice became quieter, more dangerous. You made me what I am, sent me to die, and when I survived, you let her have me. Delilah did not apologize. She did not need to. Apology was not a language she respected, but she cared enough to explain. Not gently, never gently. She spoke of what came after Leto's death, of the collapse, of the Sabbat bleeding from too many wounds at once, of packs scattered, havens burned, soldiers lost, of the Second Inquisition learning too quickly, of the Anarch pressure, of the Camarilla retaliation. There is no Sabbat left the way you imagine it, Delilah said. The words landed heavy, not dramatic, empty. The sect is fractured, hunted, starving. What remains is running, hiding, devouring itself, or pretending not to be afraid. Fae heard the words, but she did not understand them. Or she refused to. To her, Delilah was not confessing ruin, she was explaining weakness. And weakness from Delilah felt obscene. Fae looked at her, almost disgusted. And what are you doing here now? Delilah held her gaze. Fae stepped forward. I survived alone. Another step. And my only motivation was killing you. Her eyes brightened with something ugly and intimate. Lucky me you are still alive. A pause. Pathetic. Fae looked her over slowly. Now weak. Her face twisted. And this version of you is disgusting. The words struck deeper than Fae understood. Not because Delilah took every insult seriously. Fae lacked knowledge, lacked strength, lacked history. Much of what came from her mouth was pain pretending to be truth. But between the cruelty, Delilah saw the real damage. Kaitlyn's seal, Fae's resentment, the abandonment turned into purpose. The girl Delilah had discarded had not simply survived. She had become a blade aimed back at her. Fae lifted her chin. The next time I see you, I will kill you. A faint tremor moved through the shadows. Not fear, recognition. No, Fae corrected softly, as if tasting the truth for the first time. I will diablerize you. Delilah's expression did not change, but something ancient inside her seemed to listen. Fae smiled again. Because I refuse to pity you twice. For once, Delilah did not answer with command. She vanished, and Fae was left with the unbearable truth that some cages remain inside you long after the door opens. Nova Terrance integrated into Tucson with the same cold elegance she brought everywhere. She learned the rooms, the tensions, the appetites, the old grudges hidden behind courtly smiles. She understood very quickly that Tucson was not peaceful. It was controlled instability wearing perfume. Nova adapted. She always did. But to Kaitlyn, Nova remained mostly irrelevant. A favor from New York. A useful political object. Elegant, competent, disciplined, yes, but not yet someone who had earned weight in Tucson's court. Kaitlyn respected her enough to keep her near, but not enough to need her. Not yet. That was about to change. The Second Inquisition was evolving. At first, Kindred had dismissed them as hunters with better toys. That mistake was becoming expensive. They learned patterns, financial anomalies, missing persons, surveillance gaps, heat signatures that disappeared after sunset, bodies that appeared in the wrong places with impossible wounds and no clean explanation. They were no longer simply hunting monsters. They were studying systems. And in Tucson, systems were beginning to crack. Fae did not care about politics. She did not understand the masquerade the way elders understood it. To her, secrecy was not sacred. It was inconvenience. She had been raised by violence, shaped by dominate, and kept by people who used her more than they taught her. So when ghouls irritated her, she ended them. Quickly, carelessly, leaving bodies where they fell. No ritual, no cleanup, no concern. The first death was buried, the second required favors. The third drew attention. By the time the pattern became clear, the Second Inquisition was already watching. Kaitlyn had to vanish from public movement for months, not because she feared them, because a prince does not survive by underestimating mortals who have learned how to weaponize daylight. Only Aila knew where she was. Only Aila had access. Only Aila carried messages between hidden rooms and silent orders. And Fae, still restless, still careless, still half-starved for attention and half-drunk on resentment, became the crack no one had sealed properly. The night everything escalated, someone knocked on Faye's penthouse door. Faye did not answer immediately. She watched through a mirror first. A man stood outside, calm, polite, too ordinary. That alone made him wrong. Faye opened the door. The man gave a small, professional nod. "Fae Pierce, I have some questions for you, if you do not mind. This is about one of your employees." Faye blinked once. Employee? Yes, Susan Escovetti. The name meant nothing to her. Her face remained blank, not guarded, not confused, empty. The detective noticed. Instead of pressing, he showed her a photograph. Faye looked down. Recognition finally arrived, not as concern, as classification. "Oh," she said, "the servant." The word changed the man's eyes, just slightly. "Enough. Might I ask a couple of questions?" Faye leaned against the door, faintly amused. "Do I have to?" The detective remained polite. "If not now, then in a few minutes, with an order." Faye smiled. That amused her. She stepped aside and let him in. The penthouse was too expensive, too clean, too carefully arranged for someone who seemed so young and so detached from consequence. Faye guided him toward the sofa and sat across from him, watching him the way another woman might watch a glass of wine, or pray. The detective began with regular questions. When had she last seen Susan? 15 days, Faye said. Maybe 20. Did you investigate what happened to her? Faye looked genuinely puzzled. Why would I? The detective paused. She worked for you. Yes, Faye said, not the other way around. A faint smirk touched her mouth. I found another one. The detective studied her. So you replaced her and did not even consider finding out what happened? All I knew was that she was not here when I needed her. The detective let the silence stretch. Then he said carefully, She is dead. Faye's smirk remained for half a second, then faded into blankness. No grief, no shock, no guilt that looked human enough to be useful. The detective watched her closely. Did you know? Faye tilted her head. Why would I? A pause, then colder. Or why should I care? The detective frowned. She worked for you for almost a year. Faye snapped before boredom could become anger. That does not make her more than a servant. I have another one. And where is she? Faye glanced around, as if only now remembering that another body should have been present. Good question. Her expression hardened with irritation. I do not know. Seems like I need to find another one. The detective tried to hide his reaction. He looked around the penthouse, at the luxury, the glass, the art, the view. This place is expensive, he said, and you look very young. What is your occupation? Faye answered without hesitation. I read and take care of myself. You do not work? No. How do you afford this? Faye smiled again, but now there was danger in it. Not charm, not flirtation, decision. He had become irritating, and irritation with Fae was often a death sentence. "I do some work here and there," she said, "but I do not pay for anything." The detective's eyes sharpened. "Who does?" "My lover." "She pays for this?" Fae stood and walked toward the kitchen. "Yes." "What does she do?" Fae opened a cabinet slowly. "Business." "What type of business?" Fae looked back at him over her shoulder, already playing with dinner before touching it. "How could I know? She comes from time to time, uses my body, and leaves." She slid a glass forward on the counter. "Do you want anything?" Her smile became sharper. "I am getting thirsty." The detective did not understand the joke. Not fully, but he understood enough to stand. "What is her name?" Faye stared at him. She knew she should not say it. Somewhere beneath the bond, beneath the seal, beneath the reckless need to wound everything that came too close, she knew names had power. But his fate was already decided. So she gave him one more thing before the end. Kaitlyn Thorne. The detective nodded once, too seriously. Then he pushed further. "Your current servant, as you call them, James Descartes, has been missing for 2 days. I am afraid you will need to come with me to the station." Faye's gaze changed. The room seemed to darken around her. "I did not have plans to go out tonight," she said softly. The detective reached for authority and made the mistake of stepping closer. Faye moved first. Her hand closed around his throat, fast, precise, inhuman. With the other hand, she cut deep across his cheek and tilted his face toward the glass, letting the blood spill red and warm against the rim. "And those plans," she whispered, "will not change." The detective panicked then, not because he had not known monsters existed, because knowing is not the same as feeling one decide to eat you. "You will be killed," he spat, voice strained beneath her grip. "Monster," Faye smiled. He forced the words out. "You already told us what we needed. You are being recorded." Then he pulled open his shirt. Microphones, wires, a hidden system pressed against his skin. Faye frowned, not afraid, confused, annoyed. Only then did she attempt to push into his mind, to take the location of whoever listened on the other side. But nothing opened. The wall inside him was not mortal panic. It was preparation, training, protection. He was not a regular detective. He was Second Inquisition. And somewhere inside Faye, the seal burned faintly, as if even Kaitlyn's mark recognized the danger she had just created. The man laughed through terror. "They are already on their way, and you will die." Faye's expression emptied. Then she smiled. "So are you." She tore his throat open. The blood came hot. Faye drank him down until his body had nothing left to confess. Minutes later, the door was breached. Not by police. Not really. By men and women armed with weapons made for things that should not exist. Light exploded into the penthouse. Fire followed. Rounds tore through furniture, glass, walls. Faye did what she knew how to do. She survived. She did not preserve the masquerade. She did not hide the impossible. She broke through a wall, opened shadow where no shadow should open, and vanished through a portal before the penthouse became a furnace. The portal threw her into Aila's haven, uninvited, bloodied, furious, still carrying the taste of the detective in her mouth and the scent of fire in her hair. Aila was there, silent, watching. Faye opened her mouth to speak. Aila only said one thing. "Stay!" A pause. "Do not move." Faye stopped. Not because she wanted to obey, because Aila's voice left no space for argument. Aila left to scout the damage herself. The penthouse, the breach, the bodies, the recordings, the tactical signs left behind by the Second Inquisition. The masquerade damage was not small. It was everywhere. A call was made to Kaitlyn. Nova's involvement would be needed, not requested, needed. Because this was not merely a dead detective, not merely a raid, not merely Faye being careless. This was evidence. This was exposure. This was a thread leading toward the Prince of Tucson. Aila returned later that night. Fae was still there. For once, quieter. Aila did not comfort her, did not punish her. Not yet. She only said, "Tomorrow night I will take you to Kaitlyn." Fae did not ask where. She understood enough to know that if Kaitlyn had vanished from public movement, wherever she was now was not a place Fae was meant to know. That night, Fae stayed with Aila. Aila was never truly alone. There was always Dove, quiet, invisible when she wanted to be. A presence tucked into the edges of Aila's existence like a shadow that chose not to leave. Dove did not speak much, did not demand attention, did not try to soften Aila with words. But she was there, and sometimes that was the only thing keeping Aila from dropping further away from whatever humanity still remained inside her. Fae noticed Dove, or rather, noticed the shape of her absence, the way a room felt watched without threat, the way Aila's silence had an anchor in it. Fae said nothing about it. Some things were too fragile to mock, even for her. The following night, Aila drove Fae to the coast, then beyond it. A private road stretched toward a secluded island mansion in the middle of the ocean, connected to land by a guarded route that felt less like access and more like permission. The mansion rose from the dark water with perfect Ventrue arrogance, elegant, cold, expensive, untouchable. It looked exactly like the kind of place Kaitlyn Thorne would choose when the world became inconvenient. Aila stopped the car. Fae waited for instruction. Aila stepped out, but only long enough to make sure Fae opened her own door. Then she left. No explanation, no warning, no comfort. Fae stood alone before the mansion. Ahead of her was a long staircase, splitting at the top into two directions, right, left, choice dressed as architecture. Fae started upward. Inside, everything was polished silence. Marble, mirrors, dark wood, soft light. The kind of luxury that did not ask to be admired because admiration was assumed. Kaitlyn was already descending. Fae saw her first in the mirror, not directly, reflection before presence, a perfect Ventrue image moving down the stairs with measured grace. Then Kaitlyn's eyes found her. Recognition, then irritation, sharp, immediate. Fae tried to smile. Her charisma had never been her strongest weapon, but she tried anyway. Long time, no see. Kaitlyn stopped. Fae lifted one hand slightly. "How have you been?" The gunshot answered first, clean, sudden. A bullet struck Fae in the head. Her body dropped hard against the marble, pain exploding through her skull, white and red and impossible. She did not die. Of course she did not die, but agony owned every nerve for those first seconds. Kaitlyn descended the last steps with absolute elegance. No rush, no anger wasted in movement. Kaitlyn stopped above Fae and looked down at her as one might look at a stain on a gown. Then calmly she answered, "With a headache." Fae gasped, body twitching under the pain. Kaitlyn's voice remained smooth. "That pain you feel?" A pause. "That is the same one you gave me." She leaned slightly closer. "Every second I had to spend correcting the consequences of your behavior." Fae tried to focus on her. Kaitlyn's expression did not soften. "You made me feel like I was managing a disgusting sabbat." The words struck worse than the bullet. Fae went still. Kaitlyn straightened. "Now listen carefully." The mansion seemed to hold its breath. "You exposed a thread. You murdered their operative on record. You turned carelessness into evidence." Her voice lowered. "And because of that, you will not have another ghoul until you learn how to behave." Faye's jaw tightened. Kaitlyn continued, cold and perfect. "If you break the masquerade again, you will deal with your own consequences." A pause. "And that consequence can be me." The silence after those words was absolute. "You are not Camarilla." Her eyes sharpened. "But you are in Camarilla territory. You breathe here because I allow it. You move here because I permit it. And while you remain in my domain, you will respect my rules." Faye said nothing. For once, Kaitlyn looked at her as if silence itself was not enough. "Now tell me everything." Fae obeyed. She told the story. The detective, Susan, the questions, the photograph, the servant, the missing ghoul, the recording, the microphone, the Second Inquisition, the raid, the escape. She told the truth, but only half of it. She did not say Kaitlyn's name, not that part, never that part, and that was the mistake, because everything else was too perfect, too clean, too carefully arranged. Kaitlyn watched her for a long moment, then her expression changed. Not much. Enough. You are still hiding something. Faye's eyes flickered. No. Kaitlyn stepped closer. Do not insult me. Faye tried to hold her gaze, tried to keep the lie inside her mouth, but Kaitlyn's dominate came down like pressure behind the skull, not loud, not theatrical, precise. Faye's body went rigid. Pain bloomed through her head, sharper than the bullet, deeper than flesh. A command forced its way through the seal already placed inside her mind, opening the memory she had tried to bury. The detective's question. What is her name? Faye's own voice. Kaitlyn Thorne. Kaitlyn saw it. All of it. The room went colder. Faye trembled, not from fear alone, but from the agony of having the truth dragged out of her. Kaitlyn's face remained calm. That made it worse. You gave them my name. Faye could not answer. Kaitlyn crouched slightly, elegant even in cruelty. You did not merely break the masquerade, you placed a thread in mortal hands and tied it to me. Her voice softened, dangerously. Do you understand now why I shot you before you finished being clever? Faye's breath shook. Kaitlyn stood. Nova will clean what can be cleaned. A pause. Aila will determine what must be cut out. Then her eyes returned to Faye. And you will learn finally that survival is not the same as usefulness. Faye lay on the marble, bleeding, burning, humiliated beneath the woman whose seal lived inside her mind. And somewhere in the distance, Tucson began to tighten. For the first time, Nova became necessary. Kaitlyn's court could punish, Aila could kill, Peter could question, Faye could destroy, but none of them could clean a story the way Nova could. Nova understood narratives, public records, digital trails, witnesses, legal pressure, media silence. She knew how a name moved through systems, how evidence became rumor, how rumor became official concern, how concern became investigation, and how investigation became fire. The masquerade was not only threatened by bodies, it was threatened by paperwork, by recordings, by one careless sentence in the mouth of a girl who wanted to hurt someone and did not understand the cost. Nova looked at the mess Faye had made and saw the shape of the disaster before anyone else did. This was not a simple cleanup. This was not a dead detective. This was not even a Second Inquisition raid. This was exposure. And exposure, left untreated, becomes extinction. Kaitlyn finally looked at Nova differently. Not as a favor from New York, not as Ariel's former lover, not as an elegant woman placed in Tucson for political convenience, but as a tool the city suddenly could not afford to ignore. Nova felt the shift. Of course she did. She had spent her human life knowing the exact moment a room realized it needed her. And in that moment, standing inside the beginning of a masquerade crisis, Nova Terrance understood something with perfect clarity. Tucson had underestimated her. Good. That made it easier to surprise them. The Camarilla had been established. The city had been controlled. The prince had been obeyed. But one careless name had changed the shape of the night, and now the fire had started.